Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take just a chaotic stack of sources, articles, research papers, sometimes even leaked documents, and we give you the high-resolution summary.
And today, you are joining us for a story that is so tangled, it almost feels like fiction.
It really does. I mean, we are connecting a massive, secret Japanese stock market scheme, a naval tragedy from decades ago near Bahrain.
A really bitter class war in a small Massachusetts town.
And on top of all that, the kind of inner workings of the Federal Reserve's crisis management playbook.
Yep.
It just seems impossible that they're all part of the same story.
It is a masterclass in interconnected consequence. I mean, really, if you tried to trace the thread between, let's say, a finger freezing on a firing button in the Persian Gulf in 1988
Right.
and a $5 billion margin call in the Nikkei 30 years later, you'd think it was a novel.
You would.
But our sources show that this whole web is anchored by very human things. By ambition, by trauma, class rage, and the astonishingly fragile way modern finance actually works.
So our mission today is pretty laser-focused. We want to extract the core insights from these stories for you. We're not just going to give you a timeline of events.
No.
We're exploring the how and the why. We're really going to focus on the financial mechanisms that almost toppled a huge bank, Union Atlantic, and the human cost of all that information control and, compromised morality.
And to give you some context for all this, we're looking at the saga through 4 key perspectives, all of them drawn straight from the source material.
Okay, who are they?
First, you've got the high-flying, very compromised banker, Doug Fanning.
The architect of it all.
In many ways, yes.
Yeah.
Then there's the radical old money historian, Charlotte Graves, who's fighting this very local class war. Third is a young observer, Nate Fuller. He's grappling with grief and, frankly, with nihilism. And finally, the high-level banking regulator who has to decide the fate of the entire system, Henry Graves.
So you're about to get a shortcut to understanding that precise moment where, one person's failure spirals into a huge systemic catastrophe.
Let's get into it.
All right, let's jump right in with Doug Fanning. He's the man who builds a fortune and then, nearly destroys the system from the inside. And his whole story, as the sources lay it out, it really is rooted in one single devastating moment.
It is. The shootdown of Iran Air Flight 655 by the USS Vincennes, July 1988. Fanning was on board, and the trauma was immediate and it was profound.
We have to start there, don't we? Because that's the origin of his entire character.
Absolutely. Fanning, even decades later, is fundamentally shaped by 2 things. First, witnessing a fatal catastrophic error, and second, participating in the cover-up that followed.
And the sources say the atmosphere on the ship leading up to it was already tense.
Very tense. Morale was low. They'd run out of their promised shipment of cigarettes in Bahrain.
It's such a trivial detail, but it's so important.
It's so consequential because it means Lieutenant Commander Rieger, who is Doug's superior and his friend, had to take a cash run ashore to buy more.
And Rieger was the guy Doug relied on, his emotional anchor.
Exactly. And just like that, he's gone. So when the crisis hits, when this passenger plane is misidentified as an attacking Iranian F-14, Rieger isn't there.
And Doug is. He's right there in the combat center.
And the sources are absolutely clear on the mechanics of the failure. I mean, crystal clear. Doug is at his console. He's monitoring the incoming target.
And he sees it. He sees the altitude is rising steadily.
Rising. It's moving up into the commercial air corridor. But at the same time, the ship's fire control officer, a guy named Sikorsky, is just repeatedly shouting that the altitude is descending.
Descending.
That moment of paralysis is the absolute key to understanding Doug Fanning. He has the critical, accurate, raw data right in front of him on his screen.
The truth.
The truth. The plane has a commercial profile, not an attack profile. But as Sikorsky keeps yelling, "Descending! 250, descending!" Doug just freezes.
He doesn't say anything.
He says nothing. It was his duty to report what he saw to the captain, to provide that real-time information. And he failed to speak. That failure, that becomes the foundational trauma of his entire career.
And the trauma just gets compounded by the institutional lies that follow immediately.
Immediately and totally. Doug knew it was a cover-up. The Joint Chiefs started circulating these claims that the Vincennes was in international waters.
This was false.
Totally false. And that it was acting to protect a flagged tanker.
Also false. He had seen the Vincennes steer into Iranian territorial waters, a clear violation of their orders.
So he held the truth about the systemic failures, the personal failures, and he held his peace. He kept his mouth shut.
And that silence, it didn't just affect him. It completely defined his relationship with Rieger.
Oh, absolutely. Rieger gets relegated to desk duty after the incident. Too many pissed off captains. He's too closely associated with the mistake. He ends up quitting the Navy.
Well, he can't just leave that world behind.
No, his whole psychology is built around that kind of high-stakes environment. He can't just go quiet. So he later looks for work in logistics and force protection in the Gulf, but as a civilian contractor.
And he specifically tells Doug he wants to be back inside the emergency.
Back inside.
That need to be inside the consequence, not just watching it. That feels like a perfect lens for Doug's pivot to high finance, doesn't it? It's just a new kind of combat zone where information is the weapon.
And his entry into finance was, you have to admit, brilliantly timed. It was very calculated. He wasn't just chasing money. It seems he was looking for a way to master the kind of system that had exposed his weakness.
So what did he see?
He saw the economic landscape after the 2000 tech bust and then 9/11. The Federal Reserve had just aggressively slashed interest rates.
Which makes money cheap.
Very cheap. And all that capital was frightened. So where does it go? It flows into housing, which was seen as the safest possible asset class at the time.
Okay, so this is where we get into the financial alchemy, the stuff that really defined Union Atlantic and that whole pre-2008 boom.
Right.
The sources use this great analogy. They say the big banks treated these new mortgages like cars going into a chop shop. They were stripping them for parts, then securitizing them. We should probably unpack what that actually means.
Yeah, we should. When they say strip them for parts, what they're doing is carving up the income stream. You've got hundreds, maybe thousands of young couples making their monthly mortgage payments.
Yeah.
Instead of the bank just keeping that whole mortgage on its books, they divide the income stream into what they call tranches, basically, slices based on risk.
So you have safe slices and risky slices.
Exactly. You've got the senior tranches, which get paid first, so they're considered the safest. And then you have the junior or mezzanine tranches. They absorb the first losses if people stop paying, but they offer a much higher return to compensate for that risk.
And by packaging all these different slices together, they're turning a simple local mortgage from, Omaha, Nebraska,
Right.
into this complex global investment product.
Right. And this product was revolutionary because it solved a huge global problem at the time, which was liquidity. There was just tons of cash sloshing around the world looking for a safe place to go.
And these securitized assets were sold everywhere, right? To foreign central banks, pension funds.
All over. And the sources highlight this crucial point. This process transformed those young American couples' monthly payments into a safe haven for the Chinese surplus.
The irony there is just, it's incredible.
Think about it. The extra capital that China was earning from stocking the shelves of the big box stores where those same American couples were shopping
Was then being funneled right back into the U.S. financial system to buy up the bonds that were backed by those couples' own mortgages.
It's a perfect closed global feedback loop. It's monetizing American debt and risk. And Doug Fanning was sitting right there at the control panel of this whole machine.
He was so deep in it that his own new property in this town, Findon, it went up 30% in value before they even finished building it. A very tangible sign of the abstract risk he was helping to create.
And his management style at the bank was a direct reflection of this. It was all about information control, a clear, overcorrection for his failure in the combat center.
He insisted on what the sources call stovepiping.
Yes, raw information directly from the front lines to him, no interference from any intermediate supervisors. This way, he was the sole arbiter of what was true and what wasn't.
He needed absolute, unmediated loyalty.
Which is why he relied on this guy, Paul McTeague, a Holy Cross grad who the sources describe as the human equivalent of a single-purpose vehicle.
It's a very specific description.
Isn't it? McTeague was stationed in Hong Kong. He was, let's say, intellectually limited. His conversation didn't go much beyond hockey and derivatives, but he was fiercely loyal to Doug, the perfect conduit for unfiltered information.
And this stovepiping system, this need for unfiltered truth, is what leads him right into the core financial scheme of this whole story.
The secret Nicky play, the one that put the entire firm at risk.
And it starts with a detail that just sounds like it's from a movie.
It really does. Doug gives McTeague this mission: comfort the girl.
And this girl is the mistress of a very powerful Japanese deputy.
And in confidence, she reveals the Japanese Ministry of Finance's secret plan. I mean, this is an astonishingly high-level leak of market-moving information.
What was the plan?
It was a classic command economy move. The Ministry of Finance was planning to launch this massive price stability operation. They were going to start buying up huge amounts of domestic stocks to prop up Japan's troubled banks.
Okay, but what's the collateral damage of that?
The explicit targeted collateral damage was to cause a major loss for foreign short sellers.
Who were mostly American speculators betting the Nikkei would fall.
Precisely. But because Atlantic Securities, under Doug's direct supervision, had this inside information,
They did the opposite.
they became the one American firm to go massively bullish on the Nikkei. They started placing huge bets that it would rise using the firm's own proprietary money.
And at first it worked. The initial profits were huge.
Of course. It validated Doug's whole system. His stovepiped intelligence was paying off.
But success, as it often does, breeds recklessness and exponential risk.
McTeague starts asking for enormous amounts of margin cash. He's got a growing list of clients, these Greenwich hedge funds, who all want in on the action.
Okay, let's be really clear about what margin cash and futures contracts are here.
Oh.
This is important.
It is. When you buy a futures contract, you're agreeing to buy or sell an asset, in this case shares that track the Nikkei index at a set price on a future date.
So you're locking in a price now.
Exactly. Now, if the market moves against you, your broker, in this case Atlantic Securities, issues a margin call. They demand more cash from you to cover the potential loss on that contract.
And Doug had Atlantic Securities massively exposed by buying futures, betting the index would rise.
Massively. If Nikkei had suddenly dropped, Atlantic Securities would have owed a catastrophic amount of money to cover the difference between their contracted price and the lower market price.
But Doug's plan was to just hold on until the ministry's plan became public.
Right. He knew that as soon as that news broke, the index would predictably soar. Atlantic would reap a massive profit and they could cover all their positions.
But the risk, the exposure, it just kept growing.
It grew exponentially because of leverage. They were using a very small amount of their own cash to control these massive contracts. By the time the ministry's plan was finally announced, the total financial obligation for Atlantic Securities to purchase all these shares was staggering.
It was a potential loss of over $5 billion.
$5 billion. And here's the crucial part. That loss was bigger than the entire value of Atlantic Securities itself. This wasn't just a bad trade. It was a firm-killing, systemic, risk-generating event.
So we have Doug Fanning, this master of abstract leveraged risk, having committed what amounts to an existential fraud against his own firm.
And it all seems to stem from that one failure to speak the truth in a military crisis 30 years earlier.
Which brings all this abstract, $5 billion risk right down to earth.
Right to his front door, actually, in this small town, Findon, Massachusetts, which is where this whole other battle is taking place.
The transition from that massive abstract scale of a multi-billion-dollar Nikkei trade to a bitter local land dispute it's jarring.
It's jarring, but it's necessary. It shows you exactly how that global flow of new money translates into physical status symbols and, real social conflict at the local level.
And Doug's house in Findon is the symbol of all of it.
The ultimate symbol.
The sources describe it so vividly. It's the Greek Revival Chateau, a hulking white mass 3 stories tall, with a sunroom, a cupola, an enormous portico.
It's manicured like a golf course, and it's actively mocking the woods that it replaced.
Doug himself, according to the sources, saw it as acquiring a kind of nostalgia for American landed gentry.
But his neighbor, Charlotte Graves, sees it as something very different.
A steroidal offense.
That's the quote. And her own place, the old family salt box, is in such stark contrast. It's shingled, it's listing a bit, it's in disrepair. It's the physical redoubt of old money and, I guess, intellectual integrity standing against this larger intrusion of new, leveraged, rootless wealth.
And Charlotte isn't just some disgruntled neighbor. She's a former history teacher who was basically forced out of her job for her outspoken, radical views.
Her opposition to Doug isn't about aesthetics. It's not just that she thinks the house is ugly. It's rooted in a very deep, very cohesive political philosophy.
She rejects what she calls cheap, mindless relativism.
For her, Fanning's house is the physical culmination of decades of systematic economic erosion. She sees this clear, straight line historically between the abuses of the 19th century trust
The Rockefellers, the Carnegies.
and the modern global conglomerates like Union Atlantic or the WTO. Her core argument is that government has basically just become the poorly advertised fire sale of the public interest.
And she grounds this whole philosophical crusade in her history, tutoring of Nate Fuller. Specifically, she focuses on the adoption of the 16th Amendment.
The federal income tax.
We should probably pause here and really expand on why this piece of tax history is so central to Charlotte's entire moral worldview.
For her, the 16th Amendment is not just some technical change to the tax code. It's the last surviving moral contract between capital and the citizenry.
And the sources remind us it was originally championed by populists and socialists, right? It was driven by this rural outrage over economic inequality and the power of industrial trusts.
And then it was taken up by Republican progressives like President Taft. The coalition was politically all over the map, but the principle was unified.
Which was?
To establish a levy on corporations and the wealthy. Charlotte taught Nate this principle as if it were sacred scripture. She said, "For the privilege of earning money in this, the people's system, you, the wealthy, will pay."
And Fanning, with his tax maneuvering and his opaque financial structures, was, in her eyes, actively violating that foundational moral agreement.
That's the ideological basis for her fight. But the sources also give us this just incredible glimpse into her solitary, fractured inner life, where these ideological battles are happening literally.
She's alone in this decaying house, but she's never in silence.
Never. Because her dogs speak to her.
I have to stop you. This is one of the most remarkable details in the entire source stack. She doesn't just, talk to her dogs.
No. She holds full-blown theological and political debates with her pets. And this isn't just presented as, simple eccentricity. The sources frame it as a detailed psychological defense mechanism.
So what are these voices? Who are they?
They are the voices of history itself, arguing inside her head. They reflect her own unresolvable intellectual conflicts. Her mastiff, Sam, for instance, speaks with the King James diction of the Puritan minister Cotton Mather. Sam's voice is one of severe moral rectitude. He's always condemning self-pity and sin. The sources quote him preaching about adversity. 15 children I fathered, 13 I buried, such a record of woe as no man should have to bear. He embodies this hard-won Puritan historical fortitude.
And then there's the counterpoint, Wilkie.
Wilkie, the dark, slender Doberman. He provides the radical political critique.
And whose voice is he?
He speaks in the intense, oracular voice of Malcolm X.
Unbelievable.
He offers a much darker, more radical perspective. He's always urging her towards cynical action and immediate confrontation. Charlotte admits that Wilkie is, and this is a quote, "convinced you're a member of the Klan," whenever she mentions her wealthy brother, Henry Graves.
So Wilkie sees any attempt at, polite negotiation or legal recourse as being inherently compromised.
By a racist capitalist system, yes. So she's literally fighting this civil war between Puritan moral judgment and radical political action inside her own living room.
And it's this intellectual engine that finally pushes her toward a real legal fight. She fires her first incompetent lawyer and starts digging into her family's past, determined to find a weapon she can use against Doug Fanning.
And she finds it. It's linked directly to her grandfather, Willard Graves. She discovers that the land that Doug's colossal house is built on was originally given to the town by the Graves Society, a charity Willard had established.
And the condition of that bequest was still valid.
Still valid, which meant the land, legally, still belonged to her family trust.
So this leads to the courtroom showdown, this rare moment where these two opposing worlds, abstract finance and inherited morality, actually collide in person.
And her brother, Henry Graves, the Fed president, even shows up to watch his sister's crusade.
The judge, Judge Cushman, allows himself this moment of declamatory rhetoric. He uses the bench as a stage to deliver a moral verdict against the new money.
He quotes Gladstone. Justice delayed is justice denied. And he finds in Charlotte's favor. He grants the title back to the Graves Society.
A huge victory.
A huge but temporary one. Critically, he suspends the order for 60 days to allow for a negotiated settlement with Doug Fanning because he acknowledges the massive cost of actually having to remove that hulking house.
It's a moment of pure moral victory for her, a temporary triumph of hysterical principle over, rapacious acquisition.
But Doug Fanning, the financial artist of consequence, he doesn't negotiate.
No.
No. Instead, he delegates the problem to his associate, a lawyer named Mikey. This guy is described as well-rounded, the kind of person who handles all the peripheral, unpleasant tasks.
And Mikey doesn't fight the moral principle of the ruling.
He attacks the legal technicality. He just digs and digs until he finds that the Grave Society had stopped making donations years ago and had some tax issues.
Which nullifies her victory.
Immediately. It's a clean, brutal reversal. The moral high ground is instantly pulverized by a dry financial technicality. The system, once again, favors the abstract power of money over the earnestness of belief.
And while this high-stakes battle of finance and property is raging, we have this other perspective. Nate Fuller, the young man who sort of frames this whole local conflict.
Right. And Nate is struggling with his own pretty profound personal trauma. He's just looking for an escape from a world that he finds completely overwhelming.
His life is really defined by grief, isn't it? His father died by suicide, hanged himself up by the aqueduct.
And Nate carries this incredible burden of guilt, because during the search for his father, he was, as the sources put it, too self-conscious to call out his father's name aloud.
He was worried about, what, disturbing the neighbors?
Yeah. And he's haunted by the idea that his father might have still been alive during that silent search.
And Charlotte, in her role as his tutor, she sees this in him immediately.
She does, and she inverts the standard psychological question. For most people, the question is, why would you kill yourself? But for Nate, Charlotte realized the world was such a problem that the more profound question was, why not?
She saw him as being conscripted by his involuntary interests, his grief, his circumstances.
And this search for freedom, for a blank slate, leads Nate to the ultimate transgression.
Trespassing in Doug Fanning's empty mansion.
The sources detail the visceral feeling of this trespass. It's not just about breaking a rule for him. It's this intense, exhilarating sensation. All his senses alive with anticipation, and the fear is close to exquisite.
The house itself is like a character in his escape story.
It represents everything his own home, which is stained by grief and disappointment, is not. Doug's mansion is unmarked, so unstained by memory or disappointment. It's a perfect, untouched monument to possibility.
And this exhilaration, it naturally leads to his very complex, very transactional relationship with Doug Fanning himself.
Nate's attraction to the gorgeous Doug is intense. It's sharpened by this desire for the thick presence and the mastery that Nate feels he lacks. Doug embodies freedom from the wrecked old world.
But Doug, he sees the relationship through his own very different lens of power and control.
Completely different. He doesn't see it as intimacy. He sees it as a mechanism to address his own internal failures. The sources say he framed it as a need to fuck weakness, to pummel it. He describes using Nate as a way to tackle a male body, one like his own boyish self.
For Nate, though, the experience is this momentary, very confusing epiphany.
He realizes that by wanting to sleep in Doug's bed, by letting himself be used, he was in that moment already that free from the judgment of his father's ghost, free from the constraints of his own self-consciousness.
But the physical climax, that brief obliteration of the self, it's immediately followed by the return of the wrecked old world of things as they actually were.
The high is gone, and the weight of reality just comes crashing back.
And while Nate is grappling with these intensely personal transactions, his peers are off engaging in their own form of rebellion.
Intellectual rebellion and a lot of substance use, trying to rationalize the chaos of modernity.
That's where we get the infamous heroic dose of psilocybin.
This scene just perfectly captures the high school nihilism of the era. You've got his friends, Hal, the languid intellectual who's discussing Guy Debord's spectacle before he heads off to a university in Tunis.
And Jason, who comes back from a Habitat for Humanity trip in Jamaica with Crest toothpaste tubes stuffed with high-grade local product.
Their whole intellectual conversation is just posturing. They're talking about how ginned-up collectivity contributes to our alienation.
And they decide to take this heroic dose of mushrooms while listening to a tape of a professor discussing the Gaian mind theory.
And this theory is central to their drug-fueled contemplation. It posits that modern rationalism and ego dominance came from a traumatic severing from the planetary matrix of organic wholeness.
So the idea is that the fragmentation they feel, the nihilism, the loss of connection, it's all rooted in this big philosophical break with nature.
And the professor on the tape argues that psychedelics, therefore, must be imported into straight society as a kind of chemical catalyst, a necessary re-entry point for humanness. The drugs become this desperate physical way of mending a metaphysical wound.
But this abstract intellectual chaos is just violently interrupted by a very harsh reality.
Glenda Holland. Jason's mother. The sources give us this incredible, chaotic scene where she comes down into the basement and she's serving them dinner,
And she's serving a recipe from a Sumerian cookbook with venison.
which is a sign of her own fragmented state, isn't it? She's searching for some kind of primal, pre-modern authenticity herself, and the sources say she's operating on a precarious cocktail of Adderall, drink, and Ambien.
She completely interrupts their philosophical high. She suggests that the chaos they're feeling isn't just existential angst, it's a direct reflection of the systemic breakdown of order all around them.
She is the embodiment of the system's brokenness. The sources describe her body as glowing like an ember of some slowly dying need.
And the boys just flee. After Jason, in his drug-fueled state, insults her archaic cooking.
Which causes Glenda to reveal the immediate, harsh reality. Jason failed too many classes. He's not going to graduate.
And just like that, the intellectual framework of the spectacle and the Gaian mind just shatters.
It shatters when it's confronted with actual consequences. Failure, shame, and a desperate mother. And Nate witnesses this collapse of illusion, which just adds another layer to his understanding of the wrecked old world.
As all these individual lives are spinning through self-destruction and revelation, the financial system itself is facing its own reckoning.
All because of Doug Fanning's Nikki's scheme.
And the fate of Union Atlantic, and maybe the broader market, it all hangs on the moral choice of one key employee, Evelyn Jones.
Evelyn's position is paramount. She's the chief settlements administrator. She's the one who executes the transfer of money and instruments. Nothing moves in or out of the bank without her approval. She is the physical gatekeeper of the cash flow.
And she's dealing with this intense, very recent personal trauma.
Her brother, Carson, was killed for cash, shot in the middle of the afternoon. And this event has just sharpened her sensitivity to the kind of moral toxicity of money.
And she's the one who discovers the massive unreported loss. It was initially flagged as $340 million sitting in McTeague's scrub account, a number that Doug and the firm were hoping to just conceal.
And Doug, sensing her investigation, he tries to co-opt her. He offers her an immediate promotion to vice president of operations.
A bribe, basically, demanding her silence and loyalty.
He tries to appeal to her cynicism. He tries to downplay the loss as just a favor for a client. He says to her, leadership. How fucking debased that word has become, don't you think?
He assumes she's just like him.
That she's not a romantic about their purpose, which is simply to make money no matter how.
But Evelyn is anchored by her trauma. She remembers the devastating look on her Aunt Verna's face when she learned Carson had died for a wallet full of paper bills. The moral cost of money for her is just too high.
So she bypasses the entire internal system. She makes an appointment to visit Henry Graves, the president of the New York Fed, and, ironically, Charlotte's estranged brother.
And Henry understands that to convince her to become a whistleblower, he has to appeal to something deeper than just rules and regulations.
So he takes her deep into the gold vaults of the New York Fed, this space that's modeled on a Florentine Medici palace holding the largest accumulation of physical gold in the world.
This is such a critical moment.
Yeah.
He explains to her that the physical gold, all $90 billion or so of it in the cages, is actually trivial.
Trivial compared to the billions flowing through the electronic wires every single day.
Yeah.
We should probably explore this concept he presents in the anchor of fiduciary faith.
Yes. What is he telling her?
He's demonstrating that the system isn't backed by metal anymore. It's anchored to intangible moral qualities: trust, cooperation, and faith.
So the value of the dollar, the stability of the whole global financial network, it all depends on everyone. From Evelyn and settlements to a foreign central bank, just believing that the wires will deliver the promised billions.
And if that trust breaks, the system stops instantly. It doesn't matter how much physical gold is locked in the basement.
Evelyn gets it. She understands the weight of this moral responsibility. She tells him she doesn't trust Doug and that she is simply tired of worrying.
And that exhaustion, that desire for some kind of moral clarity, that's what compels her to agree to be debriefed by Henry's staff. She risks her whole career to expose the full scale of Atlantic Securities' fraudulent positions.
Which we now know was over $5 billion in potential loss.
Henry Graves now has to assume his role as the master plumber of the financial world. He immediately goes to confront Holland, the CEO of Union Atlantic.
And Holland responds with a classic playbook strategy designed to protect the system.
He tries to deflect all the blame onto Doug. He paints him as a rogue, trader who lost his judgment and was maybe even involved with a minor. It's a classic move to isolate the damage.
Turn a systemic problem into a personnel problem.
Exactly. But Henry just ignores the moral accusations. He focuses only on the financial magnitude and the systemic risk.
And Holland argues, pretty passionately, that letting Union Atlantic fail would be malpractice.
Because of its size and its interconnectedness, it holds 10% of the municipal bond market, it controls a massive credit card portfolio, it's overweight in mortgage securities, all these levers that, if you pull them, would crash the broader market.
It's the definition of systemic risk. The failure of one institution triggers cascading failures across the whole system.
So the decision is made very quickly and behind closed doors. Henry initiates a private sector rescue. The Fed chairman and the Treasury give their full backing, but with one critical stipulation.
They all have to agree on the public narrative.
The narrative has to be that this was an isolated crisis, a rogue trader situation, a few bad apples. This narrative control is essential to keep public confidence from shattering.
The system must be saved, but the public must not know how close they came to collapse, or that the problem was structural, not just personal.
And the rescue is executed with incredible speed. A consortium led by J.P. Morgan Chase and the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund buys a $20 billion stake to recapitalize the bank.
And at the same time, the Dutch bank ING acquires the entire Atlantic Securities Division for a nominal sum in return for assuming some of that toxic Nikkei exposure.
And just like that, the system is saved, it's compartmentalized, and it's stabilized by unelected officials who are acting on the principle of fiduciary faith, not democratic accountability.
Which brings us to the final and often tragic fates of the individuals whose stories we've been tracking.
Doug Fanning gets this one last cruel twist of irony. He learns that his lawyer, Mikey, has successfully reversed Charlotte's land lawsuit victory through that tax technicality. He's legally free of Findon.
But that victory is instantly eclipsed by the news that McTeague and Sabrina, the deputy's mistress, are both cooperating with the authorities.
His financial empire is gone. He gets a new passport, and in a final act of attempted emotional control, he surrenders the title to his Findon house to make bail.
Then he drives to his mother's old apartment in Alden. He's clinging to this idealized vision of returning to his childhood home and rescuing her from her presumed drunken decline.
But the apartment is modernized. There's a new man living there. And he learns his mother is 14 years sober. She moved on. She built a clean life entirely without him.
So the house he built, the fortune he risked, the entire edifice of his new life was rendered completely irrelevant to the one person he thought he was doing it all for.
So Doug leaves for Kuwait. He flies to work for the same security firm Vrieger had joined. He voluntarily goes back inside a different kind of war, trading his financial risk for physical combat.
And Charlotte Graves, having lost her righteous fight to a legal technicality, she retreats entirely into her historical fortress.
She sets her old family house on fire with turpentine and matches. She dies in her redoubt, surrounded by the physical manifestation of her past and hearing the final conflicting voices of her dogs.
It's a tragic ideological climax.
Sam, the Puritan Mather, is preaching the final wisdom of Stoic adversity. The Lord is in thy adversity.
But Wilkie, the radical Malcolm X, is urging action. Now is your time to act.
And she chooses her own final, desperate act, dying in the flames of her own resistance.
And finally, there's Nate Fuller, the young observer who was conscripted by his involuntary interests. He attends Charlotte's belated memorial service.
And he has this moment of profound clarity. He realizes that Mrs. Graves would have wanted him to participate in the consequential world, specifically to go to the anti-war protest that was being planned.
And he resists one final temptation.
A coy, anxious proposition from another boy, Alex, who embodied that well-groomed dishevelment, a kind of soft power that the old Nate could have easily sought to manipulate or mock.
But he rejects that small, destructive thrill of control, and he accepts the messy truth of his past. He pictures his father and Mrs. Graves hovering in the netherworld between the living and the forgotten dead.
He lets go of the fantasy of finding salvation through Doug's violent, abstract control. Nate Fuller chooses to participate. He moves from the psychological paralysis of his own trauma and the intellectual chaos of his peers toward the hard, necessary work of just living in the consequential world.
So as we synthesize this deep dive, what really stands out is the relationship between consequence and the flow of information. Dub's stovepiping of information is what enabled the whole scheme.
And Evelyn's decision to leak her compliance file is what brought it all down.
And Henry's control of financial wires ensured the systemic risk was contained, anchored completely to that idea of collective faith.
And you see the final outcomes? Doug, the self-proclaimed artist of fact who thought he mastered the consequential world, he collapses into forced flight, working in a war zone.
And Charlotte's earnest, righteous stand against the intrusion of new money ends in self-immolation.
While the system itself, run by Henry and these other unelected officials, is saved through compartmentalization and a very carefully crafted narrative of rogue traders.
The sources really leave us with a deeply cynical but maybe accurate observation. It's that those who operate with calculation and avarice like Fanning and Holland, they're never really impugned for their lack of authenticity.
No, they use technicalities and narrative to shift blame and escape consequences. They preserve their position inside the power structure.
Meanwhile, those who act out of genuine, if maybe flawed, earnestness like Charlotte and Nate, they often suffer the highest costs. Charlotte pays with her life.
And Nate has to pay by accepting the profound, difficult truth of his trauma and engaging with the world's messiness without any shield of illusion.
This entire saga, it really relies on the idea that the financial world operates based on debt, on leveraged risk, and on the abstract notion of trust. So we're left to wonder, in a world where money is created through indebtedness and fiduciary faith, what is the true surviving value of earned belief?
That's a question worth exploring long after this deep dive ends. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.